So the first Ashes test is over. What a game of cricket it was. I'm delighted to say I can now talk about it with two experts, Mike Atherton, the chief cricket correspondent of the Times, former England captain, and Gideon Haigh, the brilliant writer, the representative Australian in this conversation as well, also writes for the Times. Morning to both of you. Athers, is it fair to say that conservative, cerebral, traditional cricket won over the new flighty nonsense that England were trying to do?
Partly true. It was one to the tortoise and none to the hare, as people have been putting it. And, you know, the old saying of the race doesn't always go to the swift. And all that, Pat Cummins was belted for fourth to the first ball of the game, but had the last word when he hit the last four of the game. But England had their chances. It could have so easily have gone England's way. If you think about it, they had so many chances to win this game. They dropped endless number of catches, missed a stumping, bowled Khawaja off a no ball. In the second innings, they put down Khawaja in the first over off Jimmy Anderson when he'd made 5. So all those, every test match has what ifs, and people have really concentrated on the declaration, which I think is a bit of a red herring. England still had loads of chances to win in the end. The experience and nous of Cummins and Lyon under tremendous pressure there at the end got them over the line, but England had their chances.
So, Gideon, the narrative was that England were making the running and Australia were clinging on. Did that feel like that to you? Were you worried that Australia were going to lose the match at various points?
It never worries me if Australia loses a match, and it never worries me if England wins one. I'm only ever worried about the story of whether I'm going to be able to file on time and to length. But it was my first live exposure to baseball. Of course, I watched it on TV, but you tend not to place too much credence on something that you haven't seen with your own eyes. I found it immensely refreshing. Nothing is worse than a one-sided Ashes series. 2021 too was such a miserable experience. I think, whatever your perspective, if you loved cricket, that was nothing more tedious than a foregone conclusion. And you love a test match that goes down to the wire, one that uses all 5 of its days. That's what's unique about test cricket, in that it takes so long. We have become accustomed in this era to test matches finishing very, very quickly. But here you had test match cricket in all its moods. I mean, even England at times played slowly and carefully. Now, I think we saw more dimensions of baseball than sometimes it's given credit for. England played with great restraint in order to try and build a satisfactory lead in that second innings. It's not all slather and whack by any means. And of course, towards the end last night, Ben Stokes was setting fields that were very reminiscent of Pat Cummins' fields on the first day, with the fielders scattered like missionaries. I'd be interested to hear what Mike has to say about that, about those final fields where it seemed as though Stokes was prepared to concede the single to get a look at Lyon, but that the Australian ninth wicket pair took advantage of that.
Yeah, he had a lot of interesting decisions to make there at the end, over whether to take the new ball straight away, which he didn't, but then they got the wicket of Root. But then, of course, Pat Cummins hit Root for 2 sixes because he delayed it a little bit more. Very defensive settings, as you say, to try and get Lyon on strike, not giving Anderson the new ball. But there's always decisions. I was sat with Mark Taylor on commentary quite a bit, who I thought was a very good Australian captain. And he said that there's never one way to win a test match. People will always look back at decisions and base their determination of those decisions upon the result, hence the criticism over the declaration and whatnot. But there's never just one way. Quite surprised that he didn't take the new ball immediately, but that paid dividend. We're quite surprised that he didn't give it Jimmy Anderson. I'd be interested to know the state of Jimmy Anderson, because it seemed odd. But in the end, Lyon and Cummins were just too good in the end.
I guess the issue, I wonder that we're in danger of becoming a bit starry-eyed about this England team because they are so refreshing and they're so likeable. But we have to say that they declared Athers, to many people's minds, needlessly early. They didn't get the runs on the board. You had Joe Root dancing down the wicket and getting stumped for the first time in his Test career. You had their second innings, England's second innings, when no one got a 50. Nobody got a 50 when they were trying to build a lead. Taken together with bad fielding and a wicketkeeper who couldn't catch catches, in another era, there'd be an awful lot of criticism actually for this England team, but because they are who they are, they don't get it. And maybe that's good, but it's very notable actually that.
Well, in a previous era, of which I played in quite a few games, we missed chances and stumpings and got bowled out for, less than 150 on many occasions as well. I still feel that England gave themselves a great chance to win this game. If you get into a situation where the opposition need 280 on fourth innings, which has only ever been done once before in history by an Australian team, and that was the great Invincibles team led by Don Bradman, you've given yourself a great chance of winning the game. I know it's easy to look at the declaration, but you just don't know. That second new ball was due. Robinson might have got out quickly. England may have only added 10 or 20 more. I know Root was in control, but you just never know how an alternative narrative would prevail. And I thought there were good reasons to declare, actually, to get Warner in, to give Broad a crack at him straight away. And they still managed to get themselves into a situation, as I say, on that final day, even with all the cricket that had been taken out of the game, where, to my mind, they were favourites to win. And had they taken their chances, they would have won that game. You take Khawaja, again, it's impossible to know the alternative narrative, but if you get Khawaja in that first over, you're well on your way to winning. So I think you can be very critical that England weren't sharp enough in the field, and I think there are some concerns over their bowling with Stokes' knee, and I thought Moeen Ali was a selection that was hard to justify, given that he'd not played any first-class cricket for 2 years. But the declaration in the first innings, I wouldn't be too critical of myself.
No.
Let's look ahead, Gideon, to Lords. There are some decisions for England to make. Moeen Ali's finger is a correct question. There's the question around Bairstow. We'll get to that. Is it straightforward for the Aussies? Do you think the Aussies feel that they will have a template of sorts? They played their own game. They scored runs when they needed to. They took wickets where they needed to. They've got the best spinner, clearly, in the series in Nathan Lyons. Do you think they'll want to roll at the same team, roll the same approach in Lords?
Well, I mean, everything is condition specific. I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe gave Stark a role at Lords. I think at times their attack did seem to lack a little bit of variety. You can't say that Australia was successful in restricting England when they've scored at 5 runs and over on the first day. As you say, though, I mean, Lyon is going to play in every Test match, and he is a huge trump card because the second best spinner in this series is daylight between Nathan Lyon and whoever England can pick. Doesn't really matter who. There don't seem to be a hell of a lot of candidates. I'd be interested in asking Mike whether, I think, could England actually conceivably depend on Root for slow bowling? It seems to me that you might as well.
Well, they probably could have done it at Edgbaston, and it was unusually dry. And obviously, given the way Moeen Ali's finger coped or failed to cope with the workload put upon him, he bowled, 33 overs or something in the first innings. You probably could have got away with Root in that instance, and Wood might have given an extra bit of cutting edge. But I think it would be unlikely that Lords will be so dry. So that, again, may play into that narrative that you can play the extra seamer and do with Root. I don't know how quickly or otherwise Moeen Ali's finger will heal. It was quite a bad blister. I mean, there were lots of close-up images of that blister on his index finger. That's quite hard for a spinner But there is a bit of a gap between the next test because the women's test starts at Nottingham tomorrow on Thursday. So there is time, but I suspect they'll have to bring a spinner into the squad.
And who would you pick, Athers? Who is there? Daylight, I think, is not available, so I think you're going to have to try and find someone else.
Mr. Delight, no. Yeah. Before the game, I said I would have picked Liam Dawson. He's the kind of like-for-like replacement for Jack Leach, an experienced, similar style of cricketer to Leach, reliable, has been bowling in first-class cricket. There was some thought that England might want to play Will Jacks because of all Australia's left-handers, and he's an emerging spinner at Surrey. But as Gideon said, the cupboard is quite bare. And they may want to just see whether Moeen Ali's finger will heal. That's an unknown. But for me, I would have said probably Liam Dawson's the choice. To be in the squad, not necessarily to play.
Meanwhile, Australia, you could say, Gideon, that there's Usman Khawaja and Daylight when it comes to the performance of the Australian batsman. Will that be a worry? Or I mean, it's only one test. There's some unbelievably talented cricketers playing in the top order for Australia, but none of them seemed to get set, obviously in the same way that Khawaja did. Will that be something that's on their minds, do you think, as they head to the next one?
Well, here's another one of our prophecies that's been belied. If you'd said at the start of the game that you were going to confine Smith, Labuschagne and Warner to 80 runs in 6 hits, you would have thought, well, advantage England. A lot of us thought that batting axis was going to be the difference between the two sides, that Nelson experience. Usman Khawaja's probably crept up on the inside. Coming into this test match, he was actually averaging less than 20 in test matches in England. And he'd played 8 test matches over 10 years. So English people probably hadn't seen the advances that he's made as a batsman and as a character over the last 18 months since coming back into the Australian side. It really is a case of, in Usman we trust these days because he has been the most reliable component of the Australian top order, but also he just sends there's an element of calm in the way that he goes about his cricket. It must be pretty exciting being in the England dressing room these days watching baseball take place on the field because you never quite know when you're going to be in next. But Usman is the kind of batsman who you can sort of pop out of the shops and buy a paper and a pint of milk and come back and be pretty well guaranteed that he was going to be there.
Before you go, guys, obviously Lord's coming up. Athers, what does England need to do to win? And then what do Australia? What needs to happen for England to win, do you think? What needs to happen for Australia to win? Athers, do you want to give us England?
Well, much of the same stuff that happened at Edgbaston, actually, if they can keep Labuschagne and Smith quiet. As Gideon said, if he added Warner to the list as well. But to my mind, Labuschagne and Smith have been the biggest threat to England, and they made 35 runs between them in 4 knocks. If England can keep them quiet, that will go a long way towards giving themselves a chance for victory. And then just being sharper in the field for the chances that they do create. They created so many chances in this game on what was a dead, flat, lifeless pitch, really. So that's all a good thing if they feel that they can create that number of chances again and then take them. I really think that's where England let the opportunity slip with their lack of sharpness in the field. And hopefully if they can be a bit sharper come the next test and create some of those chances and then still be able to put Australia's bowlers under pressure as they did in that first test, then they're not without hope.
Gideon, for Australia, what do they need to do, do you think?
Well, they've got over the culture shock of baseball. That they probably came into the game skeptics. They've seen it, they've encountered it, they've endured it. They're too realistic a team for them to think that they've got it beaten. They know that at times that it will be a challenge. But they've also got sufficient faith in their own abilities and their own experience to know that they will lose sessions in the course of this series where England get a roll, and they've just got to hang in there and back their core processes. And this will strengthen their belief in their game plan. If it had gone the other way, perhaps I'm not sure that Australia would have felt all that differently, but certainly they'll now feel sort of vindicated in the way in which they approached this game. A lot of the criticisms that were made of Cummins' captaincy on the first day look very, very different in the light of victory.
Funny how victory seems to do that. Just before you go then, you both, I think, Athers, you had 3-1 England. Gideon, you had 3-2 Australia. You're allowed...
I'm on track, Stig.
Yeah. Do you want to change? You can have one mulligan now. You stick with your prediction.
No, I'm like Bazball. I'm doubling down.
You're doubling down.
Yeah.
Same for you?
That's fair enough. Funnily enough, I was catching a cab back into town last night with Jason Gillespie, and we were reminiscing of the 2005 Ashes series where Australia did win the first game, and thought as though they'd actually seen off the English threat in that summer. And Jason was reminiscing of the fact that the Australians were feeling so triumphant in the wake of that win at Lord's that they went in and they sang the Australian team song in the England dressing room after the England team had gone. And he said, Jason said, there are a couple of us thinking that, karmically, that may not be the wisest choice. So I'm sure that Australia will have at the back of their minds that they had a close run thing, a really close run thing. We haven't won a series in England since 2001. It's going to be hard, and it's going to be hard against this England team. If they do win, it will have been a victory worth all the effort they can pour into it.
Yeah, well, we shall see what happens. Guys, it's great to speak to you as ever. Really interesting stuff. And remember, if you want to read, this Ashes series is going to be a magnificent sporting event. The only place to read the best insight and thoughtful writing about it is The Times. Gideon and Mike Atherton both writing there. You don't want to miss that either.